following is an AZPM original production.
Hello and welcome to this latest edition of the Press Room from the radio studios of AZPM. I'm your host, Steve Goldstein. Our panelists this week are Schmidt of the Tucson Spotlight, Yana Kunichoff of AZ Luminaria, Ziegler of AZPM, and Tim Steller of the Arizona Daily Star. Guys, thanks all for being here again. Appreciate it. Caitlin, let's go back about a week or so, because the way these things work, we taped our last program before the verdict came out in the Ricky Garcia trial. Let's just get some analysis of what happened. He was guilty on some counts, not guilty on others. Overall, what did you think of, not judging the jury, but what did you think of what happened with the verdict and ultimately what its effect will be?
I mean, it wasn't really a surprise. I think it's pretty difficult to get a sexual assault verdict in cases like these when the waters have been muddied so much. What I thought was especially interesting was that in this case, we had both the prosecution and defense in agreement that this should not have been handled by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. It's rare in any trial for both sides to agree on something, but this was a big point of contention that I don't think we've probably heard the end of at all.
Yeah, Tim, that's a very important point because it's one of those things that, yes, what Garcia did and was found guilty of some of the counts, but it also just, the way the sheriff's office handled the entire thing, not a real external investigation, then it becomes this complication. How do you think all of that muddies the waters even further?
Well, yeah, they have an internal investigation to carry out, and is it your understanding that they're going to do that themselves, or are they going to do that with an outside? Because I feel like it definitely should be an outside entity that does the internal investigation. I mean, it would be an outside entity handling how the sheriff's department handled this complaint, which was clearly not, ideal.
Yeah, all of it was kind of a mess.
Yeah, and beyond that even, I mean, Garcia was the president of the deputies union, which was a pro-Nanos group, had endorsed him in 2020. I'm not sure on the timing of this, but they also endorsed him in this last election. So it really does not have a very good lens to it thanks to that.
Yeah, Yana, one of the things we've talked about in previous episodes of this program is the timing of everything. The fact that the AZ Luminaria, Nanos having the big fight over that and making accusations, and then here this trial comes out, but it came at a time where after early ballots had already gone through, and now that we're a month past the election. Not to throw this on you, but I mean, this Nanos in some ways led a charmed life, and in other ways coming up probably won't so much.
Yeah, I think that what the last several weeks and months, we've just learned a lot about the culture of the department under Sheriff Nanos, who is, reelected. So we're looking at another term with him as leadership of the sheriff's department. So yeah, I think that voters and just people who are watching the sheriff's department have a lot of information right now to understand how to assess the work that Sheriff Nanos is doing in that position.
So they should hold an election now, right?
This is like other countries do. Just have a special election, and we'll figure that out. So, Caitlin, you and Tim have covered Nanos for a very long time. Considering the relationship he has with the supervisors, considering this verdict, how do you think it goes from here? And do you think he changes in any way? Does he have the ability to change?
I mean, I think everyone has the ability to change, but I don't think we've seen much of a change from Sheriff Nanos over the past 8-9 years in terms of his temperament, his demeanor. I think he's a little reactionary at times. I think he's going to continue to butt heads with the supervisors. I don't think he's going to forget that Matt Hines endorsed his opponent. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with this outside investigation, if it takes place, if maybe things will quiet down a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, that really does become the question. And do things continue to roll out? I mean, things do take a little while to come out. As everyone here has filed a public records request, it takes a while sometimes.
We don't know what we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And I'll just say that I think also given the Trump administration coming in next year, the important role that the sheriff has sort of along an area that has a lot of immigration enforcement, I think having someone who's a very blustery leader, I think that's just something I'll be watching closely. There's a lot of ways that could change that dynamic.
It actually could improve the relationship between the Board of Supervisors and the sheriff because they are on the same page of not wanting to become an arm of immigration enforcement. And so that allows, the chair of the Board of Supes, who's a Democrat, never even endorsed the Democrat, Sheriff Nanos. So it gives them something to agree on and work on together.
Yeah, let's move on very, very briefly. I just want to spend a minute or two on this. Another trial-related situation. State Senator Justine Wozniak, who will be out of office pretty soon, because the next legislative session begins in January, speeding, going 71 and a 35, but tried to claim legislative immunity, and then there was the idea of having this entirely thrown out. But now we know that going forward, December 23rd, there will be some form of a trial. And to pull back the curtain a little bit, Caitlin, before we started recording, you brought up a great point about just the idea of what the defense was, or what was going on there. So give us a minute or so on that.
Yeah, the defense attorney kind of tried to play this off as not a big deal, and actually at one point said, this happens a lot more than you think with legislators during session, and don't worry about it, which the judge did not appreciate at all and mentioned in her ruling that is just not okay. So certainly a comedic point to the upcoming trial.
Yeah, there was a very similar case with a legislator from Mojave County some years back, where it was going similarly, 20, 30 miles an hour over the speed limit trying to get home during session.
We should, of course, say that Justine Wozniak disputes that she was going 71. The police officer said he clocked her at that. And on Speedway, that's really fast.
Well, it also seemed like the argument was, well, she didn't actually speed, but if she did, I mean, there was no one out there anyway, so who really cares? It's not, and legislative immunity and all these other fun things. Let's talk a little bit about the U of A and the budget and the new president. So the Board of Regents has put in some bonuses for the new U of A president, where he could end up making $1 million, which has some people up in arms a bit at this point because of how the previous president, Bobby Robbins, ran things and the budget issues there. What stands out to you about just how this is the next step when you come out of a budget crunch, and then the next headlines are, oh, your new president is going to make $1 million?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what stands out to me is the question of does what I would consider really generous bonuses and incentives, do those work as incentives for how university leadership runs an institution? And I don't know if past behavior has from other presidents, and also in other institutions has necessarily shown that. So I think I'm curious where the idea that this is the way to ensure the future of U of A comes from.
I mean,
Tim, some of the bonuses. Tell us
the wording that I understand is relatively vague. I mean, $50,000 of bonus for coming up with a strategic vision. $30,000 for building a high-quality, collaborative, mission-driven, and effective leadership team. $20,000 for working better with Michael Crow, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's the idea is it's an incentive. It feels like it ought to maybe be a little sharper in terms of what it's asking for.
And I think the bigger picture whenever we're talking about universities to me is it's a lot harder for students to afford university. University is getting more expensive. A lot more students go into debt. A lot more of the teaching staff are adjuncts, which mean that they work without pay or benefits or what I would consider a living wage. So in general, the landscape for universities is not one that feels financially, or for students and staff that feels financially stable or particularly generous.
Yeah, that's for
I
sure.
would say.
Well, Caitlin, I briefly mentioned Bobby Robbins, and you were the one who discovered his wonderful new website,
Yes.
which I guess ignores some of the budget issues that came up. So as someone who saw some of the things that Bobby Robbins did, how are you struck by President Garimella potential here?
I mean, I think one of the interesting things with President Robbins' contracts was the first year, his bonuses were really tied to student retention, to bringing in more students, success at that level on academics, on improving campus life. And then the next year, it became more about establishing the U of A's brand in Phoenix, in Washington, D.C., and it shifted to a business model. And that may be where we started to go off the rails a little bit. These are just vague enough that they actually kind of sound like we're paying the new president to do his job.
Yeah, right.
Aren't these all things he should be doing when you become a president? Isn't it part of your job to come up with a strategic vision and get along with others and hire people? So, I think this is the Regents. This is what the Regents like to do, and we'll see how it goes this time around.
Yeah, and Zach, to Yana's point about how less affordable college is now for most people, to see those numbers is just really daunting, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, as someone who graduated from an in-state school years back, I will say it's basically at a zero to what I was paying in tuition as a student at NAU back in 2000. So yeah, it's it's quite daunting to see those costs go up. And we do see things like to talking about the idea of this being like, a business idea with student retention things. One of those bonuses is a report on new revenue streams for, $40,000 bonus for doing that report. I wonder how much money will be spent on doing that report, and then the bonus comes on top of it.
Well, and Tim, it's obvious that, U of A is the centerpiece of Tucson in many, many ways. As an employer, as just when people think about Tucson, they often think of U of A. So, I just, again, coming back to this number, if in fact if the $50,000 were for things that really felt like advancements, but as Caitlin said, it does feel like it's just part of doing the job, right?
Right. A lot of people get paid a lot of money at the University of Arizona, especially the medical doctors. If you've searched through the database and sorted it from highest to lowest paid, you'll see that there's a lot of highly paid people here. And frankly, it doesn't bother me if the president gets a good salary and even some vague bonuses if he's doing his job. The thing that really came to a head during President Robbins' administration is that he was highly paid and got a lot of bonuses, and the university's finances crashed, and we're still paying him out. And so those are the little details, I think, that really bother people. It's one thing to pay for success. It's another thing to pay for failure.
Well, and one more philosophical question, Yana. Let me start with you on this. The idea that fewer and fewer people are going to college, or they're deciding, there are more unique paths, so you may not go to the traditional university. It also strikes me that I would think U of A would be a pretty attractive place to come, but maybe as universities are changing, maybe they have to pay more to get someone that they think is top notch, whereas in the past maybe they wouldn't have. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a complicated question. I used to live in Phoenix, and ASU, I think, has a huge footprint there. It's a big part of redeveloping downtown. I think it's a university that has an educational component and then has like a huge development cultural component. So I think in that sense, I learned a lot about the name of the university, but I also think students, especially in this economic moment, want to get degrees where they will know what job they're going to do afterwards. And I think like a lot of traditional degree programs and also just the way that the economy works, there's not a clear line in that. And I don't know if these bigger discussions about the presidency necessarily get at that question, I would say.
Right. It makes me wonder about whether universities are supposed to bring in money. Now, Zach, I have an English degree, so clearly I did not get a degree to go and get a job, as Yana is saying. But just quick comments on that. Do you guys think there is anything to the idea that you have to pay, you got to pay to get the best, or is this just sort of what the regents do?
I think it's a little bit of both, right? Yes, the U of A is an attractive place to come work, but at this particular moment when they were trying to hire, it probably wasn't.
Right.
Massive financial crisis in the public eye. Every little thing that's happening is being reported. So it might have been a little harder to bring in somebody without promising them a lot more money.
On the bright side, there's not much way to go but up from the crisis, and also I would say a crisis of morale. When you talk to long-term employees at the U of A, people got very discouraged that this crisis occurred, and that they were having to see another round of cuts or freezes or other sorts of financial austerity. And so that, in a way, benefits President Garimella, who hopefully will help bring the university out of that.
Yeah. So this is a little different format. I'm going to tell our viewers and our listeners about that. A week like this, I want to give, at the end of the year, our great journalists here a chance to talk about some of the stories they thought were some of the bigger stories. Maybe not the headline stories, but actually in Zach's case, yours is a headline story. And we're finding out more about that this morning related to Governor Hobbs, Arizona Department of Water Resources, and you'd already done a lot of reporting about Fondamonte and Saudi Arabia and where's our water going. I kind of want to give you the floor on this. So give us what the latest is first, as far as Governor Hobbs and the ADWR.
Yeah, the latest is this morning we got word that the proposed Willcox AMA is not going to be proposed anymore.
Active management area?
Yeah, an active management area. It will go into place, covering that area around Willcox, getting into the farm and ranch land in that area. We will see these things tend to take years to go on. It was north of 2 years ago that the Douglas Basin was put into an active management area also, and that one is still going through the process, but that is a new step that has come along. We will see how it affects things, but Cochise County is a place that has a lot of water issues. The release that Hobbs' office put out, it talked about how in that area, in some places, the elevation has dropped 400 feet. It's talked about 50 miles of fissures in the earth, 1,200 residential wells going dry. So notable issues there, as you see in a lot of places where agriculture or any cause really is pumping down groundwater.
So for members of our audience who may not know, active management area in this case, what does it mean?
Okay, so an active management area means there are restrictions on how much can be pumped. Particularly, it pays attention to commercial wells, which fall into a regulated class above and beyond what tends to go on for a rural well user. If it's just for your house, it's a much, there's much more that goes into that. All of a sudden, you can get wells denied, and there's plenty of other regulations that come on top of it, as well as increased monitoring for what's going on in the area.
So before we go back to more with Fondamonte, Tim, you definitely jumped out of your seat about the active. What's your reaction to that happening?
Oh, just it's we've been waiting so long for something to happen in the Willcox Basin. They have needed some sort of regulation for a long time. And things are only getting worse in the sense that there's more agricultural development there. And so anything that delays that is, in my mind, a bad thing. I mean, not every solution is a good solution, but starting toward good solutions is what we need.
Yeah. Caitlin, anything come to mind for you on that?
I mean,
even the politics of it?
No, these guys have got it covered.
I mean, and even on the politics of it, the thing that's interesting, this is an area that in the Arizona House, one of the representatives is Gail Griffin, who just this last session basically kept a bill that a number of rural county supervisors had put together, hoping to put it through to get some more water regulation in areas that are outside of cities, outside of AMAs. Now this is being put onto land that is in her district. It's going to be very fun to go downstairs after this and call and see how she feels about that.
Well, so another statewide politician who very focused on water in the region is Attorney General Chris Mays, who ended up filing a lawsuit. Remind people of that happened very recently, just earlier this month. Yeah,
that was on December 11th. Mays filed a lawsuit against Fondamonte, claiming that basically using nuisance law. And in the lawsuit, it talks about their operations being injurious to health, obstruction of free use of property that interferes with comfortable enjoyment of life or property by an entire community or neighborhood. That's the exact wording from that. And that has been the issue when you talk to people around there about how they are also seeing subsidence. They're seeing their well levels go down. There's a church just up the road from Fondamonte that Mays and other politicians love to talk about as an issue there that's been without water for 4 or 5 years now.
So is this, I was talking to a friend about this the other day in journalism, how much of this falls on former Governor Ducey at all?
There is some thought that it could have been there. It definitely started under his watch. Fondamonte the first reporting on them came out around 2015 from the Center for Investigative Reporting. That was square in his term in office, and not a lot happened then. We saw right at the start of Katie Hobbs' term a quick move to pull back the 100-year guarantees on some houses in the east or in the West Valley, which is not far from this area that we're talking about. So there is some thought that there could have been a little more done at that time, a little more watching over, a little more thinking about how water was being used. Finally,
not asking for an official crystal ball here, but you're going to, because you haven't talked with Gail Griffin yet, but a lot of people are thinking this should be a bipartisan issue. When the Central Arizona Project was begun, it was a bipartisan. Is it possible the legislature and the governor can work together on something here?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, this is a cross-issue or cross-political line issue. One of the big voices on it has been Holly Irwin from the La Paz County Board of Supervisors, who is a staunch Republican. And the people that she worked with on that bill, we had Travis Lingenfelter out of Mojave County, working on it. And so there is interest in this rural reform, but where you butt up against the issue is when it's people who are in the agriculture industry in that rural reform. Right. So
okay. As I mentioned, I want to talk about some stories that folks at this table also worked on. Kayla, the Spotlight did a really interesting story about Tucson Unified and climate action. And one of the lines that stood out to me, or one of the goals, is 100% clean energy by 2035. And this was also a student-driven part of this. So when I asked you to come up with a story you thought was really impactful for this year, why did this one come into mind for you?
I mean, Tucson Unified is our largest school district, but anytime something happens in Tucson that is the first or leading in the nation, that strikes me as important, especially when it's youth-led. This is championed by a group called the Arizona Youth Climate Coalition, who I've written about for several years now, who have been actively working with the city, with the governor, with the legislature, and they really were the brains behind this. And it took them more than a year to get this done. And it is comprehensive, it's aggressive, and it could serve as a playbook for the entire nation. I mean, 2035 is coming really fast. Yeah. So they have to get to work immediately. The other interesting thing about this was there was a climate action plan in the works at the U of A that was shelved because of the financial crisis. So to be able to see public schools get this done when they are cash strapped and fighting with everything they can, when a research-driven university hasn't been able to yet, I think is really special.
Yeah, Yana, I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but it's funny because when I've hosted debates and over the course of the last few months, and I would ask about climate change, and inevitably folks who are a lot younger than I am would come up and say, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
So how significant do you think that is with TUSD?
I think it's so exciting. And I really love, I think, you know, I used to be an education reporter up in Phoenix. Like, I reported on youth organizing in Chandler. And I think a lot of young people just have a sense of urgency. And I think that they are looking at the future in like a really clear-eyed way that I think maybe some adults in the process of adulthood don't always. So it makes sense that they are coming at this saying like, this needs to happen now.
I often talk to Tim about, pardon me, about the differences between Maricopa County and Pima County, even as Maricopa County goes a little bit bluer. The idea that this is, I mean, Tucson's leading the pack here. Is this something, is this about Tucson, Pima County being in an island, or is this something that could really be a pioneering effect, you think, in the state? Because we're so political on these things.
Yeah, I know. I mean, what will be really interesting to see is the extent to which they follow through, or, you know, if costs build, try to back off things. And yes, I mean, you know, I would think it could serve as a model. The question is like toward what practical end, like, and how, to what extent people will really adopt and actually make the changes that they're talking about.
And I think public school, you know, there's been like some effort and federal money as well for like electric school buses. I think you can really see the kind of imprint of public schools in the way maybe you can't a lot of other institutions. And I think that makes a good argument for that being a space where like climate action can move forward in a clearer way in some cases.
Yana, let me stick with you for the last couple of minutes because we all love the libraries. And that was something that even when I wrote to you, I said, I think I want to talk about your library series and what happened and how it started and where it is now. So, you know, give us a little bit of a Cliff Notes version. There was a move to close certain libraries, and then there was some backlash to that because there wasn't enough public comment to it. Plus, a lot of people still use the libraries. Where are we now as far as that goes? Yeah,
so just a little bit of that background is that the library administration had been working for a little while on a report that was looking at like what are the future of libraries in Pima County, and they sent that report to Jan Lesher's office, which then makes it a public document, but they had not yet been planning to share it more broadly publicly, as far as I understand, in that it had some initial dates for closing several libraries because of staffing and maintenance issues. And there was just a really big public outcry in response to that when we started writing about it. And where that stands right now is that the project has been, or those library closings have been tabled, and they're going to do a much more extensive public engagement process than I think the initial one that they had spoken of. And I think that seems like it responds to like the high level of concern I heard from a lot of different advocates.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there was a surprise at the administrative level that there was such a strong reaction?
I think that they multiple times in meetings that I was in said that they did not want it to come out this way and that they would now take back the initial dates, because initially there would be 4 or 5 libraries that, or maybe 3 or 4 that would be closed by December of this year. So in this moment, that had been the initial plan, but I was writing about it in August, so that would have been a really short timeline.
Yeah. Tim, does anything stand out to you about this? Because I keep thinking about what Yana just said about, we didn't really want it to come out this way. Well, come on, this affects a lot of people.
Right, yeah. And, you know, the other day I had the experience of being at the downtown library, and I was needing to look up some historic phone books and directories, and I had to be walked up to the third floor because from the first floor because there was no library staff up there. So this is what's going on. There's a security officer up there, a private security officer, but no one else. Some of the areas blocked off. So it's obvious the why. It's just the handling of the rollout of the idea or the debate that really is an issue here.
Yeah. So what's going to happen next on that?
So I think in January, there will be a new public engagement report put forward. The Library Advisory Board meetings are the place to go if folks want to follow that. I think we also just learned a lot about how the county does staffing. I think it's difficult to staff for the libraries, what they've said, but one of the realities also is that if a position is open for like 200 some days, the county closes it. So that's not open on the books. And that's part of the reason that over the last decade, library staffing has fallen by like 100 some position or funded library staff positions.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting.
Zach, do you used to go to the library?
On occasion, yeah. I'll take my daughter there. She is just an absolute bookworm, and it's great because it saves us a lot of money to have her check out a book for free rather than $10-15 a pop.
Yeah, a few seconds. Kaylin, are you a library user?
I am a library user. One of the other things I think is interesting is, they're facing incredible challenges, right? People do still check out books, but they tend to lend more to the digital space now, and that costs libraries so much money. And I don't think people know that. So maybe think twice about using your Libby app and go check out that hard copy instead.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin Schmidt, Tucson Spotlight, Yana Kunichoff, AZ Luminaria, Zach Ziegler, AZPM, Tim Steller, Arizona Daily Star. Guys, thank you. And thank you for all your help during 2024 with the Press Room. We appreciate it. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening to the Press Room. We'll be back and better than ever, I hope, in 2025. I'm Steve Goldstein.